Elara had always been quiet. Even on her first day at the Starship Academy, she didn't speak a single word. The other cadets, Ava, a lively girl with bright eyes, Leo, who always thought he was cleverer than everyone else, and Finn, tall and strong but easily distracted, watched her with curiosity. They whispered to each other, guessing why the small human never talked. Some thought she was shy. Others thought she was strange. None of them thought she would last long in a place as demanding as the academy. The instructors, too, noticed her silence. Commander Harris, a strict man with a voice like steel, often asked her questions in class, but Elara only nodded or shook her head. Her answers came in actions, not words. In a place filled with alien cadets who often boasted about their knowledge or showed off with complicated technology, she blended into the background, barely noticeable. During the first week, the cadets were assigned simple drills. They had to navigate obstacle courses, test their reaction speeds, and practice emergency procedures. While Ava shouted encouragement at her teammates, Leo tried to make every task a competition, and Finn relied on his strength to push through. Elara moved quietly. She didn't rush, but she also didn't lag behind. She watched everything, studied each obstacle, and moved with careful precision. At first, no one really understood her. During the climbing drill, Ava tripped over a loose metal bar and nearly fell. Leo was stuck figuring out the timing of a moving platform. Finn tried to lift a heavy container blocking the path but almost lost his balance. Then Elara stepped in. She didn't speak, didn't wave her arms, and didn't make a show. She simply moved. With careful, steady motions, she climbed the bars, timed her jumps perfectly, and shifted the container just enough so the others could pass safely. The instructors noticed, but instead of praising her, they were confused. Commander Harris frowned, leaning on his long metal cane. "How does she do it?" he muttered. Lieutenant Maris, younger and more open-minded, smiled. "She's observing," she said quietly. "She doesn't waste energy on noise. She just acts when the moment comes." Her classmates began to watch her more closely. Ava, who had been chatting non-stop with other cadets, found herself strangely quiet when following Elara. Leo, who loved to show off, tried to imitate her movements, but he stumbled repeatedly. Finn, despite his size, realized that brute strength alone was not enough to complete the drills efficiently. Elara didn't mind their attention. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply wanted to do her best. Even when other cadets laughed or whispered behind her back, she didn't respond. She had learned long ago that actions mattered more than words. Her parents had told her that humans often had to survive in places where talking wasn't always possible, and she had carried that lesson with her. One day, the cadets were assigned a navigation exercise in the Academy's simulation hall. The room was large, filled with holographic projections of dangerous alien landscapes. There were pits, moving walls, and shifting platforms. The objective was simple: reach the end without triggering any hazards. But for the cadets, it was anything but simple. Ava rushed ahead, laughing as she tried to jump across a series of floating rocks. One of the rocks collapsed and she almost fell into a holographic chasm. Leo calculated angles and tried to leap precisely, but the moving platforms were faster than he anticipated. Finn attempted to push through, relying on his strength to withstand the hazards, but he nearly triggered a trap that would have ended the simulation. Elara meanwhile studied the scene. She noticed the timing of the moving platforms, the patterns of the traps, and the weak points in the floating rocks. She didn't speak or gesture, she simply began to move. Step by step, she crossed the room with perfect timing. When she reached the last platform, she extended a hand silently to help Ava and guided her safely. She showed Finn how to balance on the moving surfaces without a word. Even Leo, reluctant to accept help, followed her instructions through gestures and learned quickly. The instructors were amazed. Lieutenant Maris shook her head in wonder. "She's incredible," she whispered to Commander Harris. But Harris only frowned. "Incredible," he said slowly. "But why is she so quiet? I don't understand humans." Elara didn't care. She had never sought attention. She simply did what she knew was right. In her mind, every move had a purpose. Every action was calculated. Even though she had never spoken in class, she was learning faster than most cadets. Her mind worked differently, observing, calculating, predicting. Other species relied heavily on technology or brute force. Elara relied on observation, patience, and instinct. The week went on and the cadets faced more challenges. They had to pilot small spacecraft in zero gravity, perform rescue simulations on alien terrain, and solve logic puzzles under time pressure. Every time, Elara performed flawlessly. She didn't boast, she didn't explain, and she didn't care about recognition. Her classmates began to respect her silently. Even Leo, who liked to win every competition, found himself paying attention to how she moved, how she thought, and how she solved problems without panic. One evening, after a particularly difficult simulation, the cadets were resting in the dormitory. Ava came over, curiosity written all over her face. "Elara," she said softly, "how do you do it? How do you know what to do before anything happens?" Elara looked at her but didn't answer with words. She simply smiled faintly and gestured toward the simulation logs on the screen. Ava watched the playback and realized that Elara had anticipated every trap, every obstacle, and every hazard. She had moved through the challenges as if she had already seen the future. Leo, who had been lounging nearby, frowned. "I don't get it," he muttered. "I've never seen anyone do this. Not even the top aliens in class can move like that." Finn nodded in agreement. "She's not just fast. She's smart in a way we can't measure. She sees things we miss." Elara simply shrugged and went to her bunk. She didn't need praise. She didn't need approval. She only needed to keep learning and improving. Every simulation, every drill, every obstacle was a lesson. And she absorbed those lessons silently, like water soaking into stone. By the end of the week, her reputation had grown. Cadets who once ignored her began to notice her presence. Instructors who were initially skeptical started to observe her more closely, realizing that humans, though physically weaker than some alien species, had a unique ability to adapt and survive. They had underestimated her, and now they were beginning to see the truth. Elara's silence became her strength. No one could predict her next move because she didn't give anything away with words or gestures. Her mind was always thinking ahead, analyzing, calculating, and preparing. She didn't rely on technology or alien advantages. She relied on herself, her instincts, her observation, and her ability to stay calm under pressure. Even at night, when the academy was quiet and the stars shone through the large observation windows, Elara would sit alone, reviewing the day's exercises in her mind. Elara stepped onto the rocky surface of the alien world, her boots crunching softly against the jagged stones. The sky was a strange greenish hue, streaked with purple clouds that glowed faintly in the dim light. The survival simulation had begun, and the other cadets, Ava, Leo, and Finn, immediately rushed forward, eager to complete the exercise. Ava shouted with excitement, bouncing on the uneven rocks. "Come on, guys. Let's move fast," she called, her voice carrying across the desolate landscape. Leo, never one to be outdone, followed, carefully studying the terrain but still moving quickly. Finn, confident in his size and strength, took long, heavy steps, relying on brute force to climb over obstacles. Elara, however, paused. She did not rush. Her eyes scanned the area, taking in every detail, the cracks in the rocks, the loose stones underfoot, the narrow ledges, and the hidden pitfalls. She noticed how the wind blew in sudden gusts, carrying dust and loose gravel. Every shadow, every movement of the terrain, every subtle sound mattered. She did not need to speak to understand what was happening. Ava leaped from one jagged rock to another, but her foot slipped. She tumbled and grabbed onto a nearby ledge, shaking with panic. "Help! I can't get up," she called, her voice tight with fear. Leo glanced over, frozen for a moment as he tried to calculate the safest path to reach her. Finn, thinking his strength would be enough, tried to pull her up, but he nearly fell himself when a loose rock shifted under him. Elara moved forward with calm precision. Step by step, she navigated the unstable terrain. She reached Ava quickly, assessing the situation without a word. She crouched down and extended a hand, not saying anything, only signaling that Ava should trust her. Ava hesitated for a moment, but then she took Elara's hand. Elara guided her safely onto stable ground. Leo watched, frustrated and confused. "How does she do that?" he muttered. He had studied the terrain, calculated distances, and thought he had a clear path, yet he could not move as smoothly as Elara. She seemed to see things he could not. Every loose stone, every small slope, every hidden danger was visible to her in a way that made the path forward obvious. Finn, still tall and strong, tried to help the next cadet, but he struggled. He realized quickly that strength alone could not save them from the dangers around them. Elara, noticing his hesitation, gestured silently toward a narrow ledge that was strong enough to support their weight. Finn followed her motion, carefully placing his feet. Without speaking, she guided him across. As the team moved together, Elara continued to observe. She noticed patterns in the falling rocks, the shifting shadows, and even the faint rumble of distant craters. She adjusted their path, signaling when to jump, when to crouch, and when to move slowly. The other cadets, though initially unsure, began to follow her lead. The simulation became more difficult as they progressed. A deep chasm opened before them, with only a series of narrow, uneven rocks to cross. Ava froze, staring at the gap. Leo calculated angles and distances with his scanner but hesitated, unsure if it would be enough. Finn, relying on brute force, considered jumping across, but the distance was too great for him to make it safely. Elara approached the edge. She studied the stones, testing their stability with a careful touch. She stepped onto the first rock and it held firm. She continued, moving slowly but confidently. Each step was deliberate, each movement precise. Ava and Leo watched, realizing that Elara was doing more than moving. She was predicting how the rocks would respond, how the wind would shift, and how the unstable ground would react. When she reached the other side, she turned back to the others, silently signaling them to follow. Ava stepped cautiously, trusting Elara's lead. Leo followed, still amazed at her calmness and precision. Finn, who had doubted her method, took a deep breath and moved carefully, realizing that he had been too hasty before. The team reached a narrow cliff path with steep drops on both sides. Small rocks and loose gravel made the footing dangerous. The wind picked up, gusting suddenly and threatening to knock anyone off balance. Other cadets in parallel simulations had fallen in similar situations, but Elara did not panic. She led her friends forward, adjusting her pace, placing her feet with care, and ensuring that Ava, Leo, and Finn mirrored her steps. At one point, a small rock slide occurred, triggered by Leo's weight on a loose boulder. Several stones rolled toward Ava, who froze in terror. Elara reacted instantly. She pushed a larger rock to block the smaller stones and guided Ava to safety with a gentle touch. Neither words nor commands were necessary, her actions communicated everything. After the danger passed, Leo looked at her with astonishment. "Elara, how did you know to do that?" he asked, but she only shook her head and smiled faintly. Finn, usually blunt, said softly, "You think of everything. You see things we don't even notice." Elara simply nodded and continued moving forward. The terrain grew more treacherous. They had to cross a shallow river of glowing liquid, its surface bubbling and unstable. Ava hesitated at the edge, but Elara pointed to a series of stable rocks just beneath the surface. Step by step, she demonstrated the path, guiding Ava, Leo, and Finn safely across. Her calmness seemed contagious. The others found themselves thinking more clearly when following her lead, moving with care instead of rushing. As they climbed a steep ridge afterward, they encountered a group of alien cadets in their simulation. The aliens tried to intimidate them, shouting commands and trying to block their path. Ava panicked slightly, Leo tensed, and Finn prepared to push through. Elara, as always, remained silent. She observed the aliens' movements, noticing gaps in their formation. Without a word, she led her friends around the group, using the terrain to avoid confrontation. By the time the alien cadets realized what had happened, Elara and her team were already ahead, safely continuing their simulation. By the time they reached the final zone, it was clear that the simulation had been far more difficult than most had expected. Other teams had fallen, struggled, or failed entirely. Elara and her friends arrived together, unharmed and unscathed. Commander Harris, who had been observing from above, raised an eyebrow. "How did they make it through?" he asked. Lieutenant Maris smiled. "The human," she said quietly, nodding toward Elara. "She leads without speaking. She sees everything. She thinks differently." Ava looked at Elara with admiration. "I don't know how you do it," she said softly. "You're amazing." Elara only smiled faintly, not feeling the need to explain. Leo shook his head in disbelief. "I've never seen anyone move like that, ever." Finn nodded. "You saved us, all of us. And you didn't even speak once." Elara didn't need recognition. For her, the exercise was about learning, surviving, and helping her friends. Words were unnecessary. Observation, patience, and action were enough. She had learned long ago that humans had a unique ability to adapt to any situation, even when other species relied on technology or brute force. The Academy's AI quietly recorded every moment of the cadets' training. Cameras, sensors, and drones captured every jump, every step, and every decision made during simulations. Most of the time, the instructors reviewed the footage for obvious mistakes, failures, or extraordinary skill. When it came to Elara, they often thought her victories were simply lucky. Clara, one of the instructors, leaned back in her chair, frowning at the screens. "It can't be a coincidence," she said quietly as Simon, her colleague, shook his head. "She always wins, but she never talks, never explains. Maybe it's just luck. Maybe she doesn't even understand what she's doing." Simon pulled up another recording from the Rocky survival simulation. The screen showed Ava stumbling, Leo hesitating, and Finn nearly falling. Then there was Alara. She moved silently, deliberately, observing everything. She stepped carefully over rocks, shifted her weight to prevent slips, and helped her friends without saying a word. At first glance it looked simple. At second glance it was extraordinary. "Look at this," Simon said, pointing to the screen. Alara paused for just a moment before moving across a narrow ledge. The camera zoomed in on her feet. Every step she took was precise. Every rock she touched, every hand she extended, and every pause she made was calculated. "She's thinking ahead," Simon said, astonished. "She isn't just reacting. She's predicting." Clara leaned closer. "Humans are unpredictable, but this," she shook her head. "I've never seen anything like it. She doesn't rely on scanners or calculations. She doesn't even speak. She just knows." Over the next few days the instructors reviewed more footage. Alara's hidden genius became impossible to ignore. In one simulation the cadets had to cross a series of floating platforms over a glowing lava pit. Most cadets misjudged distances or slipped, but Alara moved carefully, testing each platform with a gentle tap of her foot before stepping fully. She guided Ava and Finn across by subtle gestures, signaling when to jump and when to hold still. Leo, who tried to follow without her guidance, struggled and almost fell. In another exercise the cadets faced a maze of collapsing tunnels and hidden traps. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and many cadets panicked. Alara did not. She paused at junctions, watching how the shadows shifted and how the dust settled. She mapped the safest path in her mind, then led her team through without hesitation. Each time a trap was triggered elsewhere in the maze, she adjusted silently, guiding her friends to safety. Clara and Simon began to take notes, pausing and replaying every scene. They noticed patterns. Alara's hands moved slightly to test surfaces, her eyes darted quickly to study angles and timing, and her steps were always measured. She seemed to understand the limits of gravity, the movement of objects, and even the reactions of other cadets before they acted. It was as if she had a map of the simulation inside her mind that no one else could see. "What makes her different?" Clara asked one evening. "Other cadets rely on machines or brute strength. Alara relies on observation. She notices the smallest details and uses them to survive. It's remarkable." Simon nodded. "She doesn't speak and yet she teaches everyone around her. She shows them what to do without telling them. That's genius. Silent genius." The instructors began to realize something else. The AI footage showed not just Alara's skill but her method. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She studied, adapted, and acted at the right moment. Each small movement had a purpose. Even the way she shifted her weight to avoid loose rocks or how she placed her hands to steady Ava's balance was deliberate. Every action was part of a larger plan, though no one could see the plan in her mind. Other cadets began to notice too. Ava, who had followed Alara in simulations, began trying to imitate her calm approach. Leo, still competitive, studied her movements carefully, trying to understand her timing and patience. Finn, who had relied on strength alone, learned to observe first and act second. Alara never complained, never taught in words, but the others slowly learned from her example. One day the instructors decided to test the footage further. They ran a simulation using only the patterns from Alara's previous exercises. The AI predicted that following her movements exactly would result in success. When the cadets replicated her steps and timing, even alien students who had struggled before completed the course without mistakes. Alara's silent methods had become a blueprint for survival. Clara watched the playback with amazement. "Her actions are teaching the AI something new," she said. "It's learning from her. Every step she takes, every decision, it's showing the machine how humans survive." Simon frowned, deep in thought. "It's more than that. It's not just survival. It's creativity. She adapts to situations no machine can fully predict. She's human and humans are different. They improvise, they notice things others miss. That's why she succeeds." Alara, meanwhile, continued her training as usual. She didn't know, or care, that the instructors were studying her. She moved through drills, simulations, and exercises with the same calm focus she always had. Her mind worked quickly, analyzing paths, testing stability, and predicting outcomes. She adjusted her actions constantly, small movements making a big difference. The cadets around her started to rely on her more and more. In one navigation exercise, a narrow bridge suspended over a deep chasm threatened to collapse under the weight of multiple cadets. Ava froze in fear, Leo calculated angles with his scanner, and Finn stepped too hard on the weak planks. Elara, as always, stepped carefully first, testing each plank. She guided Ava with a gentle touch and showed Finn how to distribute his weight to avoid breaking the bridge. Not a single word passed between them, yet her guidance was clear. By the end of the week, the instructors had reviewed every exercise Elara had completed. Clara and Simon agreed on one thing: what they had thought were flukes were not luck. Elara's genius was real. It was quiet, subtle, and invisible at first glance, but it was undeniable. She used observation, patience, and careful action to succeed where others failed. She was teaching lessons without speaking, showing skills that no other cadet possessed. The AI too seemed to recognize her skill. The recordings were compiled, and simulations began incorporating patterns from her movements. New cadets, both human and alien, learned faster when they followed Elara's methods. Her quiet genius was becoming a tool not just for her but for the entire academy. One evening, Clara and Simon watched the last simulation of the day. They paused the footage on a close-up of Elara's hands, the way she had shifted a loose rock to stabilize a path for Ava. Simon shook his head. "It's incredible," he said. "Every tiny action matters. Every small decision is perfect. She's a master without even trying." Clara nodded. "And she doesn't need to explain it. She doesn't speak, she doesn't argue, she just does it. That's why she's different. That's why humans are special. She shows us what it means to survive without relying on technology or power. She relies on herself." Elara, unaware of their conversation, was already preparing for the next simulation. She checked her equipment, adjusted her boots, and thought about the terrain she would face tomorrow. The training simulation on the frontier planet had started like any other exercise. The cadets were supposed to navigate a rugged canyon filled with obstacles: steep cliffs, loose rocks, narrow paths, and shallow streams of glowing liquid. It was a test of skill, agility, and teamwork. The instructors had carefully designed the simulation to challenge cadets without real danger. Or at least that was the plan. Elara stepped onto the rocky terrain with her usual calmness. Ava, Leo, and Finn followed her closely, still relying on her quiet leadership. Other cadets rushed ahead, trying to complete the exercise as fast as possible. Alien cadets from different species ran in chaotic lines, shouting and arguing, their confidence high because they trusted their speed and strength. Then, without warning, the Academy's AI controlling the simulation malfunctioned. A series of holographic barriers collapsed unexpectedly. The glowing liquid streams shifted dangerously, spreading across the paths they had used moments ago. Rocks tumbled down cliff sides, and alarm sirens blared loudly, echoing through the canyon. What was supposed to be a controlled exercise had suddenly turned into a real emergency. Ava froze. She stared at a section of the path that had collapsed, her face pale with fear. We can't cross there," she whispered. Leo looked at the shifting terrain, trying to calculate a safe route with his handheld scanner, but the readings flickered and gave inconsistent data. Finn, usually confident in his size and strength, stepped back, unsure of how to help anyone without slipping or falling himself. Elara, however, did not panic. She scanned the canyon carefully. Her eyes moved from rock to rock, noting which stones were loose, which ledges could hold their weight, and where the safest paths might be. The wind gusted sharply, but she didn't flinch. She thought quickly, using every lesson she had learned from previous simulations. Step by step, she moved forward, testing rocks with her feet before stepping fully. She extended her hand toward Ava, signaling her to follow. Ava hesitated, shaking slightly, but she trusted Elara. With a careful step and a gentle push from Elara, she moved across the first dangerous ledge. Leo followed next. He was unsure, his hands shaking as he tried to adjust the scanner, but Elara gestured silently for him to watch her movements instead of relying on his device. She stepped onto a narrow plank of rock, shifting her weight slowly to show how to maintain balance. Leo copied her steps, carefully moving across without triggering the loose stones below. Finn, strong but impatient, wanted to rush, but Elara stopped him with a calm look. She pointed to a set of rocks that were more stable. Then she demonstrated how to step carefully and distribute his weight. Finn followed, realizing that brute strength alone would not save them. Each step needed thought, patience, and observation, lessons he had learned silently from Elara over the past weeks. Meanwhile, the other cadets were panicking. Alien students slipped on rocks, shouted at each other, and made mistakes that endangered everyone. Holographic barriers that had not been planned shifted unpredictably, and the path forward seemed impossible for those who relied solely on technology or strength. Elara noticed a falling rock about to strike one of the alien cadets. Without hesitation, she leaped forward, catching the cadet by the arm and pulling him out of danger. She didn't speak. Her movements were quick, precise, and deliberate. The cadet stared at her, astonished, but said nothing. Elara continued on, guiding her own group safely along the path. As they climbed a steep cliff, a sudden tremor shook the ground. Loose stones rolled down and Ava gasped in fear. Elara stopped, crouched low, and tested the ground with her hands and feet. She found a small ledge that was stable enough for all of them. Then she demonstrated the path, stepping carefully. Ava followed, Leo followed, and Finn followed, each learning silently from her observation and example. At one point, they reached a narrow rope bridge suspended over a deep chasm. The bridge swayed violently in the gusts of wind, and some of the ropes had begun to fray. Ava froze again, staring at the drop below. Elara did not panic. She moved first, testing each step and adjusting her balance with tiny movements. She extended her hand for Ava, guiding her across safely. Leo followed, watching every subtle shift in her body to maintain his balance. Finn, despite his bulk, was able to cross without incident because he copied her careful technique. The other cadets were not so lucky. A few slipped, their screams echoing through the canyon. Some managed to grab hold of ledges or ropes, while others fell into simulated pits and had to be rescued by instructors. The difference was clear. Elara's calm observation and careful actions had kept her group safe while the panicked cadets struggled. After crossing the bridge, they reached a part of the canyon where the glowing liquid streams had expanded, blocking most paths. Many cadets tried to jump across, only to slip and fall into the dangerous liquid. Elara, studying the scene, noticed a pattern in the rocks along the edge. She moved first, carefully testing each stepping stone. Then she signaled her group to follow, guiding them with subtle gestures and movements. Step by step, they crossed safely while others floundered. Finally, they reached a cliffside where the exit from the simulation lay. The rocks were jagged and uneven, and the wind blew harder than before. Ava hesitated, clutching Elara's arm. I don't think I can do this," she whispered. Elara looked at her and smiled faintly. She gestured for Ava to watch her movements carefully. She stepped slowly, distributing her weight evenly, and reached the top without difficulty. Ava followed her example, moving as Elara had demonstrated. Leo and Finn followed, and soon all four were standing safely at the cliff's edge. The instructors arrived shortly afterward, reviewing the emergency footage. Commander Harris looked at the screens in disbelief. "How did they survive?" he asked. Clara, beside him, shook her head. "Elara led them," she said simply. She remained calm, observed everything and guided her team. Every move she made saved lives. Simon nodded. "Her instincts are incredible. She doesn't panic. She sees danger before it happens and acts immediately. That's human intuition, and it's beyond what most of the other cadets can do." The other cadets, exhausted and shaken, looked at Elara with a mix of awe and respect. Ava, normally talkative, simply nodded. "She saved us," she said softly. "All of us." Leo, still analyzing the simulation, said quietly, "I can't believe it. Every time there was danger, she knew exactly what to do." Finn added, "I've never seen anyone move like that. Not even the instructors could have done it better." Elara didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had done what was necessary. Words were useless in situations like this. Observation, careful planning, and calm action were far more important. She had learned long ago that survival depended on thinking clearly, adapting to the environment, and trusting your instincts. Lessons that many of the alien cadets had yet to understand. That night, back at the academy dormitory, the instructors reviewed the footage again. The days after the frontier crisis were filled with quiet reflection at the academy. The instructors gathered in the observation room, reviewing the AI recordings of every cadet's performance. They had seen many great cadets before, but none like Elara. Every drill, every simulation, every emergency situation showed her calm, clear thinking and her ability to adapt faster than anyone else. Clara leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. "It's not just skill," she said softly. "It's method. Every move she makes is precise. Every decision is deliberate. And she does it all without speaking a single word." Simon nodded. "And she helps others without telling them what to do. She guides them silently. That's the real genius. That's what we need to teach every cadet, human or alien." They decided to take Elara's training footage and analyze it carefully. Every moment she moved, every step she took, every gesture she made was studied and recorded. What had once been just one human cadet's quiet actions was now becoming a blueprint for survival across the galaxy. In the next week, new simulations were run using the lessons learned from Alara. Cadets of different species attempted exercises that were once impossible for them. Alien cadets who had struggled to stay on rocky terrain or navigate unstable bridges now followed the same steps Alara had used. Slowly but surely they succeeded. The instructors watched with satisfaction. Her quiet genius was spreading. Ava, Leo, and Finn were particularly interested. They had been with Alara through every challenge, seen her lead in silence, and experienced her instincts firsthand. Ava often tried to imitate her calmness, watching her movements and attempting to replicate her patience. Leo studied her methods and tried to calculate how her timing worked, though he knew it was more instinct than science. Finn learned to observe first and act second, realizing that strength alone was not enough. One day, during a simulation designed for teamwork and strategy, cadets faced a treacherous canyon with narrow paths and falling rocks. The instructors paused the exercise and instructed the cadets to follow Alara's recorded methods exactly. The group of alien cadets hesitated at first, unsure of how to move without panicking, but when they observed her strategies on the AI footage, they began to mimic her careful steps. They paused at the right moments, tested the ground before stepping, and guided each other silently. By the end of the simulation they had succeeded flawlessly. Clara smiled as she watched. "She's teaching them without even being here," she said. Simon agreed. "Humans like her are rare. She has the patience, the observation, and the adaptability that no algorithm can replace. And now others are learning it too." Alara herself was unaware of how much impact she was having. She continued her training as usual, moving silently through exercises, carefully observing her surroundings, and adjusting her movements to suit the situation. She did not speak of her successes and she did not ask for recognition. She only acted, thinking and learning. The academy soon decided to make her training footage part of the official curriculum. Every cadet, human or alien, would study it before attempting dangerous simulations. Her actions, recorded in detail by the AI, became a standard for understanding how to survive in unpredictable environments. Instructors used the footage to show cadets how to move carefully, observe everything, and stay calm under pressure. When the news reached cadets across the galaxy, it caused a quiet sensation. Alara, the silent human, had become a legend without ever speaking. Cadets in distant starships and remote outposts studied her methods through the AI, learning how to think clearly, move carefully, and adapt to challenges they had never faced before. Ava, Leo, and Finn felt proud to know her personally. They understood that her silence was not weakness but strength. It allowed her to think, observe, and act in ways others could not. Other cadets began to understand this as well. Words were not always necessary. Actions, careful observation, and calm judgment could teach lessons far more powerful than speech. During one lesson, a group of alien cadets hesitated at the edge of a simulated cliff. Their leader, unsure of how to guide them, turned to the AI footage. They watched Alara's steps, the way she balanced on loose rocks, the way she extended her hand without words, and the way she moved calmly through dangerous terrain. Slowly they imitated her, stepping carefully, observing the environment and helping each other. By the time they reached the end of the simulation, they had learned a lesson they would never forget. Survival depended on calm, clear thinking and careful action. Even the instructors began to see a larger lesson. Humans, small and often underestimated, had a unique way of thinking. They could adapt quickly, observe clearly, and remain calm under pressure. Alara's example proved that these traits were more valuable than speed, strength, or technology alone. One evening, Clara and Simon discussed the impact of Alara's training. "She's changing the way we teach survival," Clara said. "Other cadets are learning to observe first, think before acting, and stay calm no matter what happens. That's something no machine can teach. That's purely human." Simon nodded. "And it's not just about survival. It's about leadership, teamwork, and patience. Alara leads by example and now others can follow. Quiet humans like her may be rare, but they are extraordinary." Alara continued her training in silence, unaware of the recognition she had received. She moved through the academy's corridors, across obstacle courses, and over simulated terrain with her usual focus. She analyzed every situation, calculated risks, and helped her friends in subtle ways. The AI captured every movement, and instructors used those recordings to teach cadets across the galaxy. Ava watched her one day quietly. "I still don't understand how you do it," she whispered. "You never speak, but you teach everyone." Alara only smiled faintly and adjusted her gear, continuing forward. Her lesson was in her actions, not her words. Leo, who usually wanted to know every calculation and formula, nodded slowly. It's instinct, I think. She knows what to do before we even see the danger. Finn added, and she doesn't rush. She watches, learns, and acts at the right moment. That's what makes her so good. The instructors smiled as they watched the three of them together. They realized that Alara's methods were not just useful for humans. Every cadet, regardless of species, could benefit from her calm observation, careful planning, and precise action. Her silent genius had become a model for training, teaching cadets how to survive challenges that once seemed impossible. Weeks later, the Academy announced that Alara's footage would be used as a standard across all training programs. Cadets on distant worlds would learn from her, studying how a quiet human could move through danger with calm, careful actions. Her silent leadership was now part of the curriculum, and cadets everywhere began to understand that humans were more adaptable, observant, and resilient than most had assumed.